arm using an armature. I'll try and keep it brief, so please bear with me. So first of all, you will need a single armature bone. I typically rotate that around 90 degrees. So if you press Control and R, you can then lock that in and tab into edit mode, which will then allow you to change the size of your armature roughly to the size of the hydraulic arm you want. And then obviously with the basic hydraulic arm, you would have two pieces to that. So if I click E for extrude and then press there we go, X, that will extrude it along the X axis. And then if you click the whole thing, I think let's go ZX90. No, look. Okay, cool. And then once you've got those two, which are the two components of your hydraulic arm, you then need a third bone which will drive the arm itself to give you that level of proceduralness. So if I press E again, extrude, and then X to get it along the X axis, I then typically would click on that bone and press P to separate the bones, which will then mean it will be a completely separate bone to the chain that you've created. That's important because this will then drive how the rest of the armature will work. So if you then click both of those together, go up into object mode, pose, and then this is where I can never remember the keyboard shortcut. If you click the driver bone and then the end of the arm, and then I think it's let's have a look. Let's bash some buttons and see what happens. I don't know if it's K, no, T, yeah, okay. So if you press Shift I, you want to create something called add IK to active bone, and IK stands for inverse kinematics. You'll know you've got it right because it'll go yellow. Now, this is where we find out if I've done it the right way around or not. Don't think I have. What? Oh, no, I have. There we go. So now you can see what you would also want to do is go to object, set origin to the center of that bone. So then if you press G, you'll get this. So this is the start of your hydraulic arm. Obviously, they only move in a single plane, so you can start to create that. So then the next port of call, Alt G, should bring it back to the center where it was before. We need to start to add something that we can actually parent to these bones to make it so you can actually get your hydraulic arm. So if I go to, I think if you press Shift A, that will then get you your options, which will get you a cube. So typically, because we start from the origin, we can get that. And then if I press Alt Z, which will go into X-ray mode, then the tab, make sure you're in the vertices selection mode at the top here. You can then drag that to the center point. So what I would say is the pivot point of your hydraulic arm is in the center here. So to drag out a little bit further, and then you will be able to do, so push tab back out, Control A this time. So you want to, apply the scale so that when you go in, because I typically like to try and bevel these if I can, go back to the edge selection that is, both these sides, press Control B, and you can start to bevel that. So you now can start to see how we're starting to build. Hang on, try that back a little bit to this hydraulic arm. And then the beauty of this is because you've created it from that center point and dragged it out. Hopefully, the origin point will be at the origin point of the armature bone as well. So duplicate that, bring that to the center of there again, and then obviously if you tab into edit mode, press 1, which is you like quick select for your vertices mode, and then you can drag that back into sort of the middle there. So then the next stage for this is to parent this to the armature itself. So if you first click on the piece of the hydraulic arm you want, then you click on the armature. So there's a bit of a battle between the two. If it's in light yellow, that means that's the sort of the, what's the word? That's the main selection rather than the secondary selection. You then go into pose mode. If you don't get this right, you won't see pose mode. And then the point from that is, if you click the bone you want it to be parented to, press Alt, Control P, go down to bone, and then that will lock that part of the geometry to that part of the armature. Go back into object mode, do that the same with the first part. Select that, Control P, bone. Right, okay, now if I go back out of X-ray mode, what should happen if you go back into object mode, there, okay, is you should start to see your armature doing its thing. Obviously, you would never have that kind of overlap, so just for the sake of argument, what I might do, is that. Like that. Me. Daniel. Talk amongst yourselves. Scale. Alright, I need to be a bit careful with my selection for the ends for the bevels, I think. So we end up with this. Then what I would then do is thinking about this mechanically. Then. Okay, cool. Code mode. Control P. Bone. Back out again. And click your two pieces. If you want to parent both of those, otherwise it'll look silly because only one will move. Those. Control P. Bone. Tap back out. Right up for now. They should look a little bit more. Army wise. Right, okay, cool. Then you can do things like stick a shaft through that if you wanted to. At the top. Again, you can play around with like making this a little bit more realistic once you've sort of got everything working. Top. That's in there. Doing it with a pin. D. D. Make sure that's in the center so that typically you would pin that shaft into the armature. Put it on that bone. A bone. And then do the same with the first shaft. Pose mode. Control P, bone. Okay, cool. So now I can tab outside of edit mode. You've now got very basic hydraulic, well, an arm to start with. Then we'll talk about hydraulic pistons. So that's the next thing. So let's see if I can remember how to do this. Bring it into front. X-ray mode. What you're gonna need to do with this is add another single bone, and then that somewhere where you'd see the sort of pivot point for the hydraulics being, and then if you select the other bone, the key with this is to parent it to that bone. The idea being now is that if you go back out to pose mode, you should be able to then shift that backwards and forwards, and that the important part is that that bone stays where it is, because that's the pivot of where the hydraulic ram's going to sit. So front, I'm going to duplicate that, something similar to that bone. That would where it would probably be. Again, you should probably use a reference of a picture of a hydraulic arm for like an excavator or something like that, but just for the sake of this tutorial, I'm just going to quickly go through that pose mode again. So that and that. P bone. Okay, cool. But I think shift that to where you want it to be. See where that's gone. They're staying where they are, which is great because what we need to do next, which is the bit that creates the sort of hydraulic moving in and out, is to add a bone constraint So again, I think you can only do this in pose mode. Pose mode, which gives you another set of options. And then it is, if I can remember which one it is. Is it dump track or is it track 2? Let's give that a go, see what happens. Boop. Nope. It's probably going to need a bit of editing. I always thought it was dump track. Let's go through. There we go. Bound. Okay, so if I go to the front view now, what you should see start to happen is it's always tracking to that point. So the thing to do now is, as we've just done with the other one, is to do exactly the same, but reverse the process. The dump track to this armature. Come on, please. I'm still in pose mode. Go into that. So now you notice, you can select the bone if you want to. So this is the basis of your hydraulic ram. So you've got two points, make sure that slide in and out of each other. So if I now go to front view, add a cylinder, scale it down, rotate. The center in there. I'm sure there's probably an accurate way of like locking this in, but press R to rotate it. And then make sure you go on to local, tab into edit mode, which will then give you your sort of, hopefully we'll probably look at like a halfway point on that. Scale that down a bit more. So again, you can kind of play around with this at your leisure. So we want them to parent that cylinder with this part of the armature. So go into pose mode again, Control and P, the bone, okay, there. And then if you duplicate that and it travels along the same plane, obviously this arm will typically be smaller because it has to go inside. So it doesn't really matter how long that is really, because it will be inside the other part of the ram. Select that again, object, pose mode, Control and P, bone, and then go back out again. So what you should start to see now is even if you drag these out to the side, global, they're parented to that bone anyway, aren't they? So if I grab the bones, well, let's just run it here, you'll kind of see what happens. You can see there it's sliding in and out of the armature itself. So that's just a super quick way of generating a scale that down. It kind of fits in there. Make sure it's long enough. So back to the local view again, which slips inside there. Then you can do things like start to stick a bevel on that, make it look a bit more pistony. Great. And then for inset, and then extrude will give you a bit of a right click, shade smooth, right click, shade smooth. And then you've got your armature, and then you'll do that. So the only thing you could probably do to make this a little bit better is if we add little hydraulic hose. So if we Control A, go to curve, Bezier curve. Yeah, the beauty of this is there's a cool little thing you can do with hooks, which means there's no simulation involved, and it will sort of react within reason to what you're doing with the movement of the armature. So if I go to the front view, tab into there, the key with this is you can only do it with a curve with 2 points, because you have to put hooks on each of the 2 points that you've got, and then they're the ones that drive how the cable will move. So if you click on that G, move it to somewhere where the piston goes in and out, and then I just have a static location to where these hoses would be. Go into your properties of the curve, into geometry, and then if you just extrude that a little bit, you'll kind of see that you get a bit of a cable there. Not that to 24 to give you a bit more resolution. You can also, inside the add modifiers, add a subdivision surface as well if you want it really smooth, and it's quite low rent on your computer. So then, like, how do we make this move? So if I go into the front view again, left, sorry, not front, that's it, yep. Tab into that. If you click on the, I think that's called the vertices inside there, or whatever it is, the point, and then if you press Control and H, you get hooked to new object, and then do the same with this one, hook to new object. Okay, perfect. So what you'll see now is you tab out of edit mode, and you go into object mode, and you click that, is it will drive where the cable goes. So you can then parent that by that empty to your cylinder object like that. And then what you should see then is if you start to move this, the cable will move with it. And then depending on like where you want this, you can have it sort of hooked down there. Tab into edit mode. Edit mode. It's about with these kind of things. But this is like quite a quick and easy way to add some extra detail, and looks quite cool because it all moves with the armature. That's it. So hopefully that was a little bit helpful. And if these things go well, every time I do a project with something interesting that I've had to learn, I might just do a little quick tutorial. That's it. So yep, hopefully you enjoyed watching that. And until next time, thank you very much.